Can we see some new wrinkles with your San Francisco 49ers on the offensive or defensive side of the ball? And some fun chat questions already in a fired up crowd on this edition of Locked On 49ers Live.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love all the everydayers out there. Make sure you are subscribed up and become an everydayer. Hit the notification bell so you know when we go live, so you can jump in on this chat that's already popping off before you even started. And find us on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Damon says these two are the best. Appreciate you, Damon. Appreciate you jumping in early too to the podcast here. So it's
Damon's good too, by the way. Damon, shout out to my guy Damon Dickerson. Very insightful. Understands like the stats, the analytics. That he's really good at this stuff too.
Well, he's got a really good question that we're going to actually hit later. We actually changed our background because of the question we saw in the pre-chat that we're going to talk about with which unit might be at risk at getting exposed, which unit is the most underrated on the San Francisco 49ers. But let's start with the offensive side of the ball. And, of course, a full season of Brock Purdy, if we get that. That's not something the 49ers started last year with. A full season of Christian McCaffrey. That's not something that the 49ers started the year with. So, Croc, there's got to be some things that Kyle Shanahan's been in the lab cooking up for opposing defenses in 2023.
I think it starts with Brock Purdy, right? And you would think it would start, because I think a lot of the offense is going to go through Christian McCaffrey, but Purdy brings a unique skill set that Jimmy Garoppolo quite didn't, right? And so it's not like Trey Lance in the sense of, hey, we're going to run these quarterback powers and all these read options, but he's not a statue in the pocket like Jimmy Garoppolo, who's a little bit more reluctant to move around. So can we see the 49ers really move him off of his spot a lot more boots than we've seen? Because it seems like he wants that type of dynamic quarterback that can do things on the move. And clearly Brock Purdy's someone that definitely has that in his game. So is it a new wrinkle? I don't know if I'd go that far, but definitely something that they can expand on with his movement ability in the pocket.
There was a lot of boot action with the 49ers already, but I really feel like they could even go crazy with that, with Brock Purdy's skill set. And look, even if Trey Lance is the quarterback, how athletic he is, Sam Darnold can get out on the move and make plays. So I expect Kyle Shanahan maybe more than ever to get his quarterbacks on the move a little bit and incorporate the athleticism and the ability to throw on the run, create some new throwing lanes for these young quarterbacks. Because with all three of the 49ers quarterbacks, maybe the one thing with young quarterbacks that you're not sure of is how quickly you get rid of the ball, right? I wonder if Kyle Shanahan maybe wishes he would have moved the pocket a little bit in that one fateful play against the Philadelphia Eagles, where his rookie quarterback held the ball a little too long, and he could have gotten the ball out earlier. Maybe move the pocket and create a clearer window, create some timing there for some things. So and we've seen Trey Lance already in his career make some big plays on those types of plays. So I absolutely expect quarterbacks to be moving in the 49ers offense, even if it's less so designed runs. Like I do hope they scrap some of those things that they thought they were going to do with Trey Lance. He just seemed unnatural as a runner, or just because he seemed natural as a runner in college. I don't want to say not natural as a runner. He just seemed like
he's thinking.
He was thinking about it. And usually with athletes, the thing they're thinking about is when they're in the pocket trying to figure out where to throw the football. They're not thinking about running. Once they become an athlete and they tuck that football, they're off. And it just didn't seem like something that he was just an innate sense for him running the football in the NFL. And maybe it was just because it was a new style of running game for him that he wasn't used to from his college days. But man, and
when he took off, it looked good. Like, just think about the times where he's in the pocket to throw, and then he took off. That all looked good. I'm like, well, that's the runner that they want.
And all of his best runs were scrambles anyways. And Brock Purdy was making things happen too. So yeah, get the guys out on a little boot, give them a clear view of things. And if they need to take off, then they can take off and utilize their strengths. So I really hope that that's something that the 49ers do incorporate, because I think it's the strong point of all the 49ers quarterbacks, maybe save Brandon Allen of the 49ers group, and we'll see which one of the four or which three of the four are actually up with the team when the season actually starts. But I think that's a huge wrinkle that the 49ers could add, and it's part of the passing game, not part of the running game, but utilizing the athleticism of his quarterbacks.
How many more wrinkles can they add offensively with just the weaponry, right? I remember going back to 2021, it was on the goal line, Jimmy Garoppolo against Jacksonville Jaguars. Jimmy's under center. And there was like Deebo Samuel at running back, Jeff Wilson in the slot, Brandon Ayuk had his hand in the ground at tight end, and George Kittle was like split out wide, right? And it was just like the wildest formation. And I want to say that might have been the play where Jeff Wilson dragged across the formation and Jimmy kind of missed him when he was wide open. But I mean, when we talk about wrinkles, that is a wild wrinkle. So do we see more things like that? And what people don't truly understand with that alignment, you can't defend Brandon Ayuk with his hand in the dirt at tight end like you would a traditional tight end. You know, that now I have to kind of change up my defense so that there's not a mismatch with him on a linebacker. You know,
that was the ultimate positionless football play.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up that play, because I kind of forgot about it, because everybody was in the wrong position, but everyone could kind of do what they needed him to do, even if it looked weird with Brandon Ayuk with his hand in the ground. And, you know, the play ended up working and kind of not working at the same time. And those types of things, I think the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan could have a lot of fun with, because it's as positionless as it's ever been. And it already was that way, but with Juszczyk and with Christian McCaffrey and with Deebo Samuel. I mean, with Deebo and McCaffrey, that's something that, you know, they kind of mid-season. And what's funny is with when McCaffrey, where there's so much utilization with McCaffrey, Deebo wasn't getting in the ball as much then. So I wonder if there's give and take there, where maybe they're both not going to be involved at the same time. Like there might be a down game for McCaffrey when it's a big game for Deebo, because they operate in a similar area. But you could legitimately put Deebo and Christian McCaffrey in the huddle, and they each could do the other job pretty much 100%. Right? Like you could just put McCaffrey out wide, put Deebo in the backfield. Your wide receiver's playing running back. Your running back's playing wide receiver. And you have to play them straight up in the same way that you would have played it if it was still flipped.
What about just the new wrinkle of throwing the ball more, right? I mean, a lot of football is kind of headed that way, and the 49ers are like the one team that's a little behind the eight ball, just in the sense of just passing attempts in games. And we know that Kyle, you know, he wants to run the ball to set up the throws, but an added element of just a pure drop back game. And do they believe that that's a strength of Brock Purdy? That's an element I feel like the 49ers just haven't truly utilized. If you listen to anyone talk about the 49ers offense, they say that's the one thing they're kind of lacking from the Chris Sims, from my guy Greg Pinelli. We've heard, I want to say JT O'Sullivan. Like there's a lot of them there, like the pure drop back passing game. It's lacking a little.
Was it Kurt Warner as well?
Yeah, Kurt Warner. And I might have got JT O'Sullivan and Kurt Warner mixed up.
No, JT O'Sullivan definitely said that as well. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, those are just things sitting there watching film with Greg, and Greg's like, man, what are these passing concepts? Like, what is it? Like, it's just a little stale. And I've heard that a lot. So can they expand on that? I mean, that would be a huge wrinkle added to where now all of a sudden, I mean, everyone knows how dangerous they are as a running team and utilizing the running game and the looks off of that. But if they were able to add a legit drop back passing game that complements the run game, and is not all predicated on 100% like run after catch, that would be really scary.
Jericho in the chat says, can't get away from the run, control the clock, control the game. So Kyle's, I want to talk about this, because we had gotten into this subject a little bit where I was thinking, man, you know, 500 throwing attempts, can we get it closer to 600 throwing attempts? It's like, is that really what Kyle Shanahan wants to do? And we went back and we looked at some Kyle Shanahan offenses from the past, right? Matt Schaub was his quarterback. And I don't think anybody would argue that Matt Schaub is better than what the 49ers have had at quarterback under Kyle Shanahan with Jimmy Garoppolo, and then what we saw from Brock Purdy, and even what Trey Lance could be, as well as Matt Schaub played at times. And then Matt Schaub ended up being the backup for a time to Matt Ryan, and how much they threw the ball in Atlanta. So let's talk about that next. Some wrinkles on defense as well with new defensive coordinator Steve Wilks, and some overrated, underrated units on that San Francisco 49ers roster next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose on that first bet, you'll get those bonus bets. And that's $200 you can spend like money line bets every game, every day throughout the summer. Over-unders on those Major League Baseball games. Who's going to hit the first home run in a game? Tons of parlays that you can play and even build your own parlays. And man, that's so much fun and so easy to do on the app. The app is safe, secure, super easy to use. I love the website as well. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly at FanDuel. No better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel. No better place to bet on those 2023 NFL futures as well. There's weekly lines all the way through week 17 already up at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. So, do you remember what the numbers were? We looked up how many pass attempts Kyle Shanahan's offenses had with Matt Schaub as his quarterback when he was the offensive coordinator in Houston, when Matt Ryan was his quarterback when he was the offensive coordinator in Atlanta. And it was a lot. It was 585. It was 600. It was pretty close to that 600 number. I wonder what that 49ers offense could look like. And they used their running backs plenty in those days. Remember, Steve Slayton out of nowhere was a fantasy star under Kyle Shanahan with the Houston Texans. Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, they were getting balls thrown to them out of the backfield. They were running the football with a 1-2 punch with those Atlanta Falcons teams, with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones when that was firing on all cylinders. I don't see a reason why the 49ers offense can't fire, because aside from Julio being a freak, the 49ers have even more weapons on offense than those teams had. And I know Matt Ryan was a really good quarterback, but the 49ers have had fine quarterback play to throw the ball a little bit more. And maybe Brock Purdy's the one that's going to unlock that. So I like that, Croc, as a new wrinkle. Do you have the numbers in front of you now?
I have the numbers on Matt Ryan here, and he just threw the ball a ton, regardless who his offensive coordinator was. And looking back on the stats, because everyone talks about, oh man, Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, like he made Matt Ryan. And you look at it like, oh no, he was actually pretty damn good throughout his career, especially starting off. Man, as a rookie, 11-5. Now, he did have his best year with Kyle Shanahan in 2016. That was where he was 60 yards shy of 5,000 yards passing, which is absolutely wild, especially thinking for a Kyle Shanahan offense. He completed 69, pretty much 70% of his passes, 69.9. But as far as the attempts go, 534, which isn't even close to being the most. That was in the MVP year, 534. The year prior to that, 614 passes, but they also lost a lot more. They were 8-8 or a lot more. They lost 3 more games. They were 8-8 in that season where he threw 614 passes. The next year, 11-5, 534 passes. So maybe a lot of it has to do with, are we winning? Are we losing? But even then, still, 534 passing attempts for Kyle Shanahan offense is still a decent amount. What were they last year? Do we know what, and obviously the 49ers had a ton of different quarterbacks playing, but overall throughout the year from all the quarterbacks, what the attempts were?
I don't think it was far off. I think it was in the low 500s.
Okay.
I can look it up right now, but it was, I would have guessed they would have thrown even more with those 2016 Falcons.
Yeah, it was a 2015 team that threw a lot, but remember they started off hot. What were they, like 5-1, 6-0, and then they just started losing every game.
So last year, 2022, the 49ers had 512 total pass attempts in the regular season. 35 of those were Trey Lance, Josh Johnson, and Christian McCaffrey. 170 attempts in 5 games for Purdy, and then 308 attempts for Garoppolo in 10 games.
Interesting to have, what is it? We're talking about roughly 20 less attempts, but so many less yards. And that's crazy. I mean, that could be like the Julio Jones effect, but
1,000 less yards. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he literally almost threw for 5,000 yards with only 20 more attempts. Now that goes to throwing the ball down the field, I would assume.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where the strengths differ. Even if the 49ers got good quarterback play at times from Jimmy Garoppolo, the downfield pass game wasn't there. The downfield passing game was there for Matt Ryan and Kyle Shanahan and those Falcons.
Yeah. AY / was it average yards per attempt?
Yes.
10.1. That was the most in his career. That's a lot for the entire season.
Yeah, so that's 2 yards per pass attempt, not per completion, per attempt, over what the 49ers had last year, 8.3.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Oh, and then his yards per attempt, 9.3. I don't know what the heck I'm looking. Either way, they just look incredible. Like they're significantly more than whatever like the rest of his career was. Because for his career, he averaged 7.3.
AY/A is adjusted yards per pass attempt.
Okay, so that's 10.1. So the other one is average yards per attempt, or yards per attempt, and that was 9.3, which is far and away the best of his career. I don't know if the 49ers are doing that.
Downfield passing game. It's something that can be unlocked. Is that a wrinkle? Does he trust Brock Purdy enough to do that? Does Brock Purdy have the arm to do that? That'll be an interesting thing to follow this year for sure. That's the next level of this 49ers offense, right? Because teams, and that's one of the things we talk about with Ayuk. Ayuk does have one of the easier jobs in the NFL. Nobody's ever looking at him, and no team has more eyeballs in the backfield in the short passing game to allow the one guy in Ayuk to operate, with autonomy a little bit. He's like when you have 3 kids and you're really strict with the first kid and you're trying really hard to parent as good as you can. And then by the time you have the third kid, the youngest, you kind of let them do whatever the hell they want. It's kind of like that.
Julio Jones might have helped.
Julio helps everything. Julio helps the quarterback. Julio helps the other receivers for sure. But there's a lot of eyes on Deebo, a lot of eyes on Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers, a lot of eyes on Kittle, and that's short to intermediate stuff and a lot of short stuff. And that's why the 49ers see a lot of single high coverage in a lot of 8-man boxes. What about Steve Wilks? What do you think about the wrinkles there? I know we talked about on the show. It's hard because Steve Wilks hasn't been in one place very long in any of his last 5 jobs. So it's really hard to know exactly what his stamp is, except for his players like him and his teams seem to respect him and play well under him. And I know he comes from a DB background. But the 2 times he's spoken to the media as a member of the 49ers staff, he's talked about blitzing, and he's brought it up. He wasn't even asked about it. He's like, you got to bring heat on the quarterback. And so I think he's aggressive by nature. He probably doesn't want his DBs hung out, so he wants to get home. That's probably the biggest thing I think of when I think of Wilks, and what a wrinkle could be that he would bring is not so much schematically changing a whole bunch, but not sitting back on his heels. If the Niners aren't getting home, he might bring some heat.
I just feel like I hear it every year with defensive coordinators. And then we watch the 49ers and they're sent back in that quarter's defense. And it feels like that's what Kyle wants them to do. So maybe ideally is like, hey, I do want to do more fire zone stuff, have more blitzes, be more aggressive, have my outside cornerbacks play a lot more press man or press alignment type coverages. And in turn, you just see a more aggressive, feistier defense. But is that what Kyle wants? So it might not even be what Wilkes truly wants to do.
That's true. And I wonder if Wilkes can get a little bit more out of the secondary, because the 49ers have had linebackers coaches as defensive coordinators. The last 2 DCs for the 49ers have come from the previous job of being a linebackers coach. D'Amico Ryans was an NFL linebacker. Having a guy who coached DBs has that background, I wonder if he can make the unit play up, because Croc, and this kind of goes into our next question a little bit here, is the defensive backfield. And it could be one of the units that might be the most overlooked. I was listening to a radio interview today locally in the Bay Area, and it was an analyst, a football analyst that was, and I'm blanking on who it was because I was just in the car for a few minutes and caught some of this interview. And he was like, there's just a couple of units I don't like for the 49ers. That's why I think that's why I think this team has a better roster. That's why I think this team has a better roster. So I want to bring that up with you next, Croc. And I'm going to throw some things out there for the units on the 49ers that might be the most underrated, maybe the most overrated units on the team next. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you are subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts, and check out the rest of what the network has to offer. Your team's covered no matter the sport. And I'm with you twice a day here, not just the 49ers every day, but breaking down the entire NFL every day with my co-host, Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, former ESPN scribe at the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show Daily. Okay, Croc, I want to go to our question here from Damon, and he got this in pre-chat before we even started going live today, so appreciate all the guys that are in here early. Damon says, 2-parter. 1, which unit is most at risk of getting exposed? And 2, which unit is the most underrated?
I would love to say the secondary is underrated.
Is the secondary both? Is the answer to both those questions the secondary?
I like the way you phrased that. The other day I talked about, Brian Peacock. What does he do well? And I wasn't going to give the Kyle Juszczyk answer and just say, man, you're a good podcaster. I talked about all the little things that I feel like you truly do well. And that was a great way to kind of spin that. Are the 49ers the most at risk to get exposed, but also maybe the most underrated? And I would say yes and yes. This is a unit who, depending on how the coach lets them play, do you let them be a little bit more aggressive at the line of scrimmage across the board? That would be tremendous, because you got safeties back there. They make plays. They're playmakers. They're lurking. You have a big, tall, longer cornerback in Travarius Ward who likes to challenge guys at the line of scrimmage. And then you have a cornerback who ended the season where the passing rate against him was not very good, like the best out of all the cornerbacks in the playoffs, in Diamador Lenoir. So definitely, I look at this unit where there is a scenario where you see, some of the safeties like, oh man, they don't have speed. They're starting to get exposed. Oh man, Diamador Lenoir, maybe he's just too little at the catch point. Guys are kind of bullying him. Oh man, Travarius Ward, he can't play off coverage very well. His turn and run is a little suspect. So there's that aspect of it where they can be exposed. But man, if you play them how I would play them, right? And maybe I need to make a call to Wilkes, like, man, just go put those dudes at the line of scrimmage, man. Put them at the line of scrimmage. I think that's where you would see the best version of this secondary. Put those guys at the line of scrimmage, blitz guys, and let Hufanga and Gibson go out there and make plays.
I bet Wilkes would like that. Wilkes might hire you if he heard you say that. And I don't know if he's going to be allowed to do that. I don't know if defensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan is going to get in the way of allowing Steve Wilks to do a little bit more of that. We'll see what that defense ends up looking like. But you got to believe, new year, new defensive coordinator. He wasn't around, by the way, Steve Wilks either. This wasn't an internal hire. So could it look a little bit different? I think it possibly could. But by the way, that analyst, and it's basically been what, and we've talked about this multiple times this summer already, Croc, like, the 49ers think a lot more highly of their secondary and their offensive line than national media does, than someone does if they look at the 49ers on paper and like, oh, okay, well, this is where they're weak. Offensive line, secondary. I don't think the 49ers feel that way. So those are probably the two most underrated units on the team. And I would say probably the offensive line worries me more than the secondary, just because of Trent Williams and his injury history. And when he's out, like look at the 49ers offensive line on paper when Trent Williams is out. And he's going to miss 2 games this year. That's what happens with Trent Williams. You know, if he plays every game, it'll be a huge shocker. He hasn't in most seasons of his career. He's only done it twice where he played every game. And none of those were 17-game seasons. Those were 16-game seasons. He's not getting any younger. When Trent Williams is out, we're talking Matt Pryor, Colton McKivitz, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, and Spencer Burford. That's not exactly like a household who's who list of offensive linemen in the NFL. Now, is that group better than I think national media might think? I think so. I think they're well coached with Chris Forster. But could that be where, when you have young quarterbacks, where things could fall apart a little bit? You're not able to set the tone in the run game because you're not winning enough up front. So I think to answer the question the most serious way I can, the units that's most at risk of getting exposed is probably the offensive line.
Definitely not secondary. They act like this isn't pretty much the same secondary from last season. I mean,
right? Yeah, that's
Lenore
true.
played after Mosley went down. Lenore played the rest of the year. I'm not saying it was perfect, but you watch corners around the league. There's some guys getting dogged and are serious liabilities. He played well outside of the Washington Commanders game where I was like, okay, got a little lucky on a couple. They caught the offensive PI, and then the Raider game, which was right after that. It was a little weird. Outside of that, man, Lenore played well. So you got Lenore, you got Gibson, you got Hufanga, who's the All-Pro, and Javarius Ward. He played well. Why is anyone talking down on this secondary? Maybe if you're like, well, they lost Jimmy Ward in the slot, I can say, you know what, Jimmy Ward, good football player. Lose him, maybe you don't get better. And we'll see how Isaiah Oliver does, who I want to say had a better or a lower completion percentage against him. And maybe that could be schematic with that. But you definitely would have to probably go to the offensive line. Again, there's areas where I do believe the secondary could potentially be exposed. Offensive line, the reason why it might not get exposed is because Kyle Shanahan can kind of scheme around some of their weaknesses.
Right.
Okay,
and when Trent's healthy,
not that great. Okay, well, let me put George Kittle in the backfield and have him block anybody that might come off the edge. Right. Or he'll help chip a guy. Or okay, hey, Christian McCaffrey, go chip this edge rusher before you go out for a pass out the backfield. Right. Like there's just all kind of ways where you can kind of scheme around it. But secondary, it's a little bit harder to do that. That's why you see cornerbacks and those guys, like they just go really high because it's like, we just need you to be good.
You can just use your backup tight end instead of your offensive tackle to block great pass and things like that. So there's ways to get around it. But I mean, and the other thing is Trent Williams, best left tackle in the league. Colton McKivitz, tough, smart guy, might be a better pass protector than McGlinchey. You got the year 3 jump, the year 2 jump for 2 of your young offensive linemen. It could be a really good group too when healthy. But depth is suspect, as Lee says here. Rookie kicker and QB health, he adds to it. Rookie kicker, that's another. That is, I mean, game on the line. You lose football games with your rookie kicker. I mean, that could be a huge one. And that's a big unknown. And he was the best kicker in the draft. They handpicked their guy. Is he ready for prime time? We'll see. That's going to be a huge one and probably something we're not talking about enough until everyone holds their breath in week 1 when he's trying to make his first big kick.
That was one of those things where, I mean, I was, where they said pounding the table. I was pounding the table for Robbie Gould to come back. And I get it. Maybe not the strongest leg. Maybe he didn't always kick the ball into the end zone on special teams. But I would say my confidence level for anybody on this team to come through when I need them, like it's like, hey, you got to come through and make a play. I'm talking about anybody. You could be saying Nick Bosa, anybody. I had the most confidence in Robbie Gould every time he went out there to kick a field goal.
He never missed a playoff kick. I mean, that's impossible for this rookie kicker to live up to. The moment he misses his first playoff kick, everyone's going to lose their minds. Where's Robbie Gould? Why didn't they pay him $5 million? What's going on? And the higher you draft a guy like that, just the more eyeballs, the more scrutiny he's going to be under. So, yeah, Jake Moody, hope you're ready for it because there's going to absolutely be the pressure cooker on him this year as a rookie kicker for a playoff Super Bowl caliber team. Interesting here. I didn't really expect to see this, but I get where he's coming from. Daniel says the defensive line is the most at risk. Most underrated is offensive line, even though it's not top of the league, but overall they did their job last season. That's well put by Daniel. They did do their job. They got in front of guys and they blocked guys. And maybe that is one of the most underrated units as well. Defensive line most at risk. What do you think, Croc?
I find it kind of hard. Maybe if you didn't add Javon Hargraves, but adding Hargraves on top of bringing some of the other guys back, and then, it's like Kinlaw, you're kind of playing with house money at this point with him. Like, hey, man, what can we get out of him in whatever role? And that could be, pretty good if it just, we've been waiting for that switch to flip. But if it does, man, how good is that defensive line? Eric Armstead, he's very steady. You know exactly what you're going to get from him. Tremendous run blocker. Anything he gives you as a pass rusher is definitely a bonus. So I'd say that's probably one of the units I'm least worried about. I don't expect him to be great because it's still, who is that edge rusher outside of Nick Bosa? But I do expect them to be good.
3 of the 4 of their starters are damn good players. Yeah. Bosa's reigning defensive player of the year. Hargrave was just phenomenal run versus run and pass last year for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a beast inside, exactly what they need next to a guy like Eric Armstead, who's just rock solid and can maneuver around, maybe play some big end if they need to, or play just full time in the interior. It's that 4th spot and then the depth behind those guys. And Chris Kosaric has done such a great job of finding gems and getting guys coached up. And I think that's really where they've, gotten a lot of their pressure when they can't create just one-on-one wins up front, a lot of games with those guys and the way they fire off in the wide 9. I'm not worried about the D-line much unless Bosa goes down. And then you start to get a little worried on the edge. But, man, I really think there's a good chance for Drake Jackson, some combination of other players on the edge with Cleveland Farrell and some other guys to put together a decent unit on the opposite end of Nick Bosa, as long as he's on the field and himself.
And I think that's where Daniel was going with that. It is at risk if Nick Bosa doesn't play a full season.
Right.
You would be in trouble.
And the
that's for every team. Like there are other teams that have like 2 legit, like Dallas Cowboys. So I got Parsons on one side and DeMarco Lawrence on the other side. So if you're missing one, obviously your team isn't as good, but it's like, well, we're still in good hands. 49ers, you miss Nick Bosa, you are in trouble.
Yep. And I always go back to the Nick Bosa winning percentage. Go look at the games, the winning percentage in the games that Nick Bosa plays. Look at the 49ers record before Bosa showed up in 2019. Look at the 49ers record in 2020 when Bosa had a torn ACL. And then look at his healthy seasons. People talk about Jimmy W. We talked about Jimmy W. We named him Jimmy W. or Jimmy Garoppolo. Nick Bosa's winning percentage is actually better than Jimmy Garoppolo's. So he's the most important player on this 49ers team. And it's rare that a team has a player more important than their starting quarterback. I think Bosa is. I would take here's a good way to put it. I would take Bosa plus flip a coin of any of the 49ers quarterbacks versus you get to pick the quarterback, but you don't get Bosa. You agree?
Yeah.
Darnold and Bosa, let's go. Or just Purdy. Trey and Bosa. That'd be fun. All right. Good stuff. Thanks everybody for jumping in the chat. Appreciate all of you. We always end the week strong here with a live, and I love seeing people jump in and still fired up during the dead period here of the offseason about your San Francisco 49ers. Croc, we'll keep coming with you every single day here throughout the offseason. We will talk to you Monday right here. Locked On 49ers.
Subscribe to this video.